Welcome to Dekom, Law and Disorder.
The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Dekom's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Hi, everybody. It's Peter Dekom again. And before I get into today's little podcast, which I call Climate Change Tipping Points, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I'm actually trying to accomplish with this podcast. What I have seen is people are making decisions without truth or facts. Now, I am left of center biased, I admit that, but I'm also a fact freak. And I like to know truth. Even if I don't like the truth, I'm always ready to deal with it. As a lawyer negotiating transactions and contracts, one of the things I have to anticipate is what could go wrong. What are the sets of assumptions that we're making in making an agreement? Contracts are about managing expectations and basically creating a template for what happens when things go wrong. And in a strange macro way, that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. If this country cannot agree on what truth is and what facts are, if we continue to be governed by conspiracy theories, we got no shot of getting together and having a coherent country. And yeah, there have been times in the past where you had the period of enlightenment followed by a whole bunch of skepticism, whatever, and it's cyclical. The problem is modernity has imposed some very nasty realities by ignoring truth and facts. And you're going to pay for it. Every damn one of you, every one of us. It doesn't matter what you like or what you want to have happen. There's certain things like, the laws of physics that basically don't care what you want. Mother Nature started off with basically nothing. And she got rid of the dinosaurs. They were not useful. And the world basically evolved. We went through ice ages, which means everybody's thinking, this whole climate thing is cyclical. Yes, there are cyclical aspects to our weather and climate. Yes, we have La Nina and El Nino issues. Yes, we have changes in currents, but we have a very measurable reality today that is not a question mark to anybody who is sufficiently knowledgeable about the subject. There are virtually no qualified scientists on planet Earth who believe that climate change is not real. But I use the word qualified scientist. What does that mean? Well, it means basically someone who's doing medical research and is paying very close attention to viruses, or someone who's a comp sci engineer developing a new computer. Those kinds of experts are not necessarily able to contribute a meaningful amount of scientific rigor to analyzing what the hell this climate change stuff is all about. And we have people who are very happy to make references to the Bible, which there are quotes which people have taken out of the Bible that basically say, look, after the Great Flood, God promised mankind he would never have a global catastrophe like the Great Flood. And so they've basically taken that to mean, well, climate change isn't happening because God promised otherwise. And then you have people like, the Pope, who basically apparently is a religious person. And he's basically saying, hey, humanity, take responsibility for the things that you do and stop pretending as if this entire world will take care of itself. So let's start with what I think is a very, very salient reality. And that is why I call this presentation tipping points. What the hell's a tipping point? Is there a uniform tipping point for the entire planet? If you listen to all the experts, they're trying to make it easy for people to understand that there's a unitary tipping point, which is 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point the Earth goes into an automatic spiral, which will continue to produce what we call greenhouse gases, and thus climate change will just continue even if we do nothing. And that's kind of an oversimplification because clearly climate change has different impacts in different parts of the world. If you go to the coral reefs off Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, the impacts on coral are profound and have happened a long time ago. We've passed that tipping point a long time ago. We're losing coral. Why does that matter? Well, in a strange way, coral is one of those many canaries in the coal mine that give us an indication of what we as humanity and what animals face and what the oceans face. And if you wonder why taking care of the oceans is so important, most of the oxygen that we breathe comes from the plant life in the oceans. They basically take in carbon dioxide, and those plants basically using chlorophyll, photosynthesis, take the carbon dioxide, absorb it, scrub it, and release, break it down into carbon and oxygen. The oxygen bubbles up, and we breathe it. And the more stuff you kill in the oceans, the less the oceans have a capacity to give you air to breathe. The more you cut down big forests and eliminate the trees that pump out oxygen like nobody's business, you are basically making it more and more difficult. But it's not just that. You have a reality that certain kinds of things in the atmosphere are cumulative. That means that every time you add more, a lot of stuff doesn't go away. It just stays there, and you get more and more and more of it. I hate to say this, but 2024, 25, we have pumped more greenhouse gases. We have burned more, we have more particulate emissions, we have more aerosol emissions, we have more gas emissions than we have ever had. It's never been this bad. Wait a minute. There are a lot of electric cars. There's alternative energy. We've got solar, we got wind power, we've got geothermal, we've got tide power. Why are we getting worse? And the answer, again, is because it's cumulative, and we are having governments saying, especially in the Western world, by the way, it's not just Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. saying, oh, it's a hoax. At the end of all of this stuff, it's not a hoax. It's quite real. But it's not just the United States that's saying that. France is saying it. Germany is getting worn out. But I'd like to read to you the excerpts from Donald Trump's September 23rd speech to the General Assembly in the United Nations. And I'm going to read you two quotes. One, this climate change, it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. All these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong. They were made by stupid people that have cost their countries fortunes and given those same countries no chance for success. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. Okay, that's part of that speech. Here's another part. Talking about the projects that this is actually New Mexico Senator Martin Heinrich responding to that quote. And to many of the projects, Donald Trump has been canceling greens projects, solar energy, and he hates wind turbines because they look ugly. He also tells you China absolutely makes these things and sells them to the suckers around the world who buy these wind turbines, but it never uses them itself. The facts are China is the greatest user of wind turbines on planet Earth. They also invest 74% of this planet's aggregate investment in alternative energy. But I'm going to read Martin Heinrich, who is a senator, Democrat from New Mexico, and it talks about the projects that have been canceled. These are projects that Congress already approved and funded, projects that create jobs, lower electricity costs, and move our country forward. Instead of working to help our families and communities, the Trump administration is tearing these projects down, driving up energy bills for families, and putting hard-working people in New Mexico and across the country out of work. I'm going to make a blanket statement. The biggest loser industry, macro industry on planet Earth, is fossil fuel extraction. It is a huge loser. Peter, how can you say that? My God, look at all the gas stations, the gas-powered vehicles, how much electricity is done by fossil fuels. How can you say that? And the answer is very simple. Everybody on planet Earth knows that climate change is real. And even if they don't want to deal with it, when it comes down to making investments in fossil fuels, the amount of investment in that arena is dropping like a stone dropped off a high mountain. Look at the Saudi Arabia and those oil-rich countries that actually have the capacity to keep pumping oil probably for the rest of my lifetime, your lifetime, and a few cats and thrown in between. The fact of the matter is, they're not. Let me give you a little bit of information here. This has appeared in the LA Times this morning, and it basically looks at a major refinery. Remember, California has a different grade of fuel because we have serious air pollution issues. So our refineries are basically different. The process to extract particulates and pollutants is much more stringent in California than anywhere else. And as a result, the automotive industry has adopted California standards, even as Trump is trying to make sure that those standards vaporize. Well, let's take a look at what's going on. There are refinery accidents, fires, and explosions that take place at refineries across the United States. We had one recently in Carson, California. And let's take another look at one of the largest refineries in the Los Angeles area. It's in the Port of Los Angeles, and it's owned by Phillips 66, except for one catch. They're tearing it down. They're eliminating it, and they're not replacing it. It's not like they're tearing this down and putting up a new cool refinery that's really clean. They're just tearing it down. So they're basically saying that this is a century-old refinery, and they're basically going to replace it, believe it or not, with parks, stores, cafes, and anything but a refinery. And anybody who really believes that oil is a growth business, that drill baby drill has any value whatsoever, look at the people who make the investment decisions. The oil companies, private equity, Wall Street. If you don't have an alternative green strategy in your mix, you're going to get devalued. And that means it doesn't work. But what about all those oil workers? We don't want to throw them out of work. The answer is we have, whether you know it or not, we have really automated and mechanized drilling. If you look at those drilling rigs offshore rigs and the digs off Alaska, whatever, you will notice that a lot of the equipment on those platforms is totally automated. You just get a couple of really good roustabouts to put some chains on there and turn some equipment and maintain it, and they can dig forever, and it's automated. The number of jobs that are being created in fossil fuel extraction, coal included, are dropping. You can't, if you want to be a coal worker or you want to work on an oil rig, the number of jobs in that arena are dropping like a stone. So that's not really a growth area. So what do? Well, we're not going to get jobs, says Trump, in this green energy alternative. It's a scam. It's a hoax. Wrong, Batman. It's not a hoax. And there are more jobs being created in green energy and alternative energy by great leaps and bounds than they are in any other sector. Well, then you say, well, look, y'all, I'll tell you, right here in Texas, we make oil, and that's what we do. And don't tell me otherwise, because Texas is an oil state. Oklahoma is an oil state. Get it? Not so fast. Our little Greg Abbott governor, the mini Trump, basically can't even maintain his grid. Remember a couple of years ago? Texas elected to be off any other national grid. So if they suddenly have a power failure, they cannot go to the neighboring states and say, hey, I'm on your grid too. Send me some more power. They basically determined Texas don't need you. We're a Lone Star state. We've done it alone. We could do it again. Well, wrong, Batman, again, because that was one of the coldest 2 weeks Texans ever spent. They had no way to heat. People were dying literally from the cold. And take a look. Greg, you don't want to foster alternative energy. Solar is stupid, right? Turbines are awful, correct? Well, here's another reality. We haven't seen that same kind of grid failure in Texas since. Why? Well, I mean, we basically never have bad weather anymore? Not at all. There was times when the power grid has basically been 60% dependent in Texas on alternative energy. Solar, wind, etc., geothermal, whatever it is, Texas needs alternative energy. And investors in Texas, not the government, not Mr. Abbott. Gee, Mr. Trump, will you give me a full kiss, huh? Not Abbott, but the people who write the checks to invest in what makes money. They're putting their money in alternative energy. The jobs that are being created are in alternative energy. Look at Wyoming. Wyoming is about as conservative a state as you can be. Wyoming, y'all get on a cowboy. We're the cowboy state. Well, I got news for everybody. The cowboy governor of that state loves alternative energy. And he knows that Wyoming is rife with wind and sun and all the other things. So he has invited people to come into Texas and to build their green platforms in Wyoming, because Wyoming has so much land, so much wind, so much sun, they know they can make a fortune. And my God, Wyoming's governor appears to be one of the best leaders in this green alternative movement. At first, Wyoming voters didn't like that. But then they started to realize lots of jobs were happening, lots of money was pouring into the states, people were taking risks on Wyoming when they wouldn't touch other states, and all of a sudden it became a very cool growth business. Wyoming, kudos to you. Thank you, Mr. Governor. You've done a good job. I hope the other states that are pretending to follow this path of hoax realize they're going to lose money, a lot of it. So the United Nations basically came to a conclusion in 2024. And it basically states simply, global carbon levels rose by a record amount in 2024, according to the United Nations. Carbon dioxide emissions from human activities and wildfires, rose last year, 2024, while the land ocean's ability to absorb carbon diminished, leading to a record surge in the amount of planet warming gas in the atmosphere. What do you say? Well, yeah, but that's from wildfires. I mean, wildfires are natural things. Sure they are, but not the level we've been facing in the last few years. We are basically looking at wildfires, which are an absolute product of heat. I mean, fire, heat, global warming, heat, fires getting kindling, stuff drying out, forests and other plants drying out, becoming tinder. It's like a direct relationship. If you have wet plants, they don't catch on fire. If you have dry plants and a lot of it forming what we look at as kindling, they burn and burn and burn. And if you live in Los Angeles, as I do, you know how bad it can be. Whether you've been in Malibu or Pacific Palisades or Altadena, and I have a lot of friends who lost their homes. And as much as people say, well, in California, we don't like California, so anything that's bad for California is good for America. The problem is we reflect the realities that are everywhere. If you think it's only California that has wildfires, try Utah, Idaho, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. All these western states are suffering even as there's flooding on the East Coast, because basically, how do you get flooding out of climate change? Let's take a look at what causes flooding. Tropical storms. But we've always had tropical storms. I have a list here, and I might actually start referring to a few of them, what I call the billion-dollar disasters in the United States. And virtually all of these billion-dollar disasters are a direct and immediate result of climate change. What happens? Well, if you understand how water as it gets warmer, it tends to evaporate. Duh! Anybody who's ever been near a kettle and watched the steam rise when they're heating boiling water knows that hot water evaporates. Well, even if you kick the temperature up 1 or 2 degrees, there's obviously going to be more evaporation unless you had a reduction in temperatures. It's just natural. Look at water boiling. You will see stuff rising off the surface. That's happening, for example, in the Gulf of America, Mexico, whatever the hell you want to call it, or it's a reality. And that Gulf and the area off the Atlantic on the southeastern shores are basically the kindling for tropical storms. And what that means is, as ordinary rainstorms pass over these heated water bases, there's more water evaporating into the systems. And that water evaporating is sucked up, and the storms become more intense because they have more water in them. If you notice a hurricane or a bad tropical storm, you'll actually see water falling out of the sky. Where did that water come from? From heated water in the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf. Or other places. I mean, obviously, if you have typhoons in Asia, all this is all related. Temperature impacts the absorption of water into a storm. Has another nasty benefit. As you watch a storm becoming more intense, understand if it's pulling more water out of the Gulf or out of the Atlantic, by definition, it's getting heavier. And the heavier it gets, the more weight you have in the storm, the slower it moves. And the slower it moves, the more it dumps rain in concentrated areas and keeps going. So what you've got is more frequent, more intense, heavier, slow-moving, nasty tropical storms, hurricanes included, that basically decimate the lands upon which they drop. And if you look at places like Florida, where you're right there on the ocean, and you're on the Gulf and the ocean, you are one of the most vulnerable places ever. But those storms don't stop in Florida. They continue right on up the coast because basically they have enough water in them and enough energy in them that they just keep moving. And if they just keep moving, that means other people beyond the traditional recipients of the lovely gift of hurricanes are going to get more of their own traditional lovely gift of hurricanes too. It goes all the way up the coast. I mean, when in the world has Massachusetts had to worry about hurricanes? It does now. And I don't know how many of you have actually lived through a hurricane. I did when I lived in Washington, D.C., my hometown. We had hurricanes come up there, and I remember looking out the window in a very solid apartment building and watching massive trees bending over and breaking. And I ducked as wind came and hit the window. And I looked outside, and nobody would ever walk out there. It had enough strength to pick you up and blow you away. Others who have lived it have watched the storm surges that come with hurricanes. This water comes in and just totally decimates anything by the ocean. You're looking at the Outer Banks in North Carolina are becoming the Outer Bank. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. People are not protected by what used to protect them from hurricanes. And what's fascinating is if you go to Florida, Miami Beach, Coral Gables, the whole area, not Clark Gable, I'm sorry, Coral Gables, you are going to actually see something strange. Streets are flooded. Not like, 10 feet of water, 2 feet. That only happens in the hurricanes. But a heavy rainstorm in the Miami area can produce flooded streets. And I mean, whether it's 6 inches or 8 inches, they get used to it. Why are you getting used to something that you could have prevented? And that's kind of a pain in the ass, but we do that. We don't seem to care. It seems to be, it's just seasonal. It's cyclical. It'll go back to normal. No, it's not going to go back to normal. What if you're wrong? That's the real question I ask people. Let's assume you believe everything you say, but just assume for a moment that you're wrong. You really want to live with the consequences of that decision or not? So I look at people who are tearing apart infrastructure for climate change, and I think, why are you taking that risk? Let's assume you're wrong. And you are wrong, but let's assume you don't know that you're wrong, but you're ready to sort of like, okay, just in case, I'll take some precaution. But instead, we're not building charging stations. We're now a country where electric vehicles, EVs, are no longer the main selling things that they used to be. People are, if they're going to buy an EV kind of car, they're leaning towards hybrids. I have a hybrid. And I look at that and I say, why do you have a hybrid? Simply, there aren't enough charging stations. You know, when we built last year, we built, 700 advanced charging stations across the country. They're not cheap to build. The kind of thing you have in your home, the 220 charger, that may charge your car overnight. That's great. But it's not the fast charger. Or if you're like what I have in my home, I have only 110, and it takes, literally, I get 40 miles on hybrid. It takes a day to charge just to get 40 miles. That's ridiculous. And at the end of all of this stuff, do we really want to keep paying for very volatile, politically impacted gasoline prices? And it is a big political reality. I'm sorry. Gasoline prices are discussed in Congress, in state legislators, and all over the place. And here's an interesting little fact. If you're a small nation and you are paying way too much to import, liquid, natural gas or gasoline or coal, you're at the mercy of the countries that have those assets. But if you're a small country and you have sunlight or wind or sea power or geothermal power, you can actually slowly transition your country to a place where you actually don't need any of those nasty imports. And more small nations are beginning to wake up and say, why don't we do that? Then we won't have to, import oil from Russia or the United States or Saudi Arabia or wherever it is. And the interesting thing about that is, guess which country loves that reality? China. China is building more and more through its Belt and Road Initiative more capacity in these small nations to generate electric power without fossil fuels. And that creates an independence from countries you may not like. And let's face it, we're trying to pressure India into not buying Russian oil. And apparently Donald Trump thought he had an agreement to that effect. But Modi, the prime minister of India, said, not in this lifetime. We import from Russia and you don't tell us what to do. We'll probably discuss, the interplay of global superpowers in future podcasts. What I think is fascinating, we just don't seem to understand that we're the outlier of most of the rest of the world. And most importantly, we have surrendered a mega business to China. China is looking at us saying, great, make this happen. We don't need your market. We have so many people buying EVs from us around the world. We make 60-70% of the EVs on the planet now, dear. So keep holding it back. Keep the American automakers out of the business. Disincent them from building EVs so we can completely capture the marketplace. BYD is a large EV manufacturer in China. And if you go online and punch out BYD, you can see the models they have. It's not that these little teeny little Fiat-like mini cars. You have everything from SUVs, sedans, small cars, big cars, medium cars, and they're all EVs. China is converting out of coal, out of fossil fuel, because China also imports fossil fuel in the form of petroleum products from its lovely, caring, and loving and kissing neighbor, Russia. Russia is this is crazy. Most people think of Russia as a superpower, which in fact it is, except it looks like a superpower based on a banana republic economy. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, banana republics are typically resource extraction economies. Whether you're in, Congo and pulling out cobalt, or you're in South American countries pulling out coffee and bananas, if your economy is primarily driven by resource extraction, as opposed to value-added creation, which is what we do, our at universities, our manufacturing plants create massive amounts of value added, and 80% of our economy is driven by service and that type of creative technology. The resource extraction economies are generally very low tech, and that includes Russia. Wait a minute, Russia has all these rockets and missiles and all this stuff. They have nuclear weapons, they have hypersonic missiles. We could do all kinds of stuff to it. But if you look at the consumer products that they use, most of them come from somewhere else, usually China. They don't make anything except weapons. They're a resource extraction company that's a country completely predicated on extracting oil. Gee, that's a good bet, huh? And in the long term, even Saudi Arabia is building all kinds of other kinds of businesses. Look at the Emirates. Look at Qatar. They're building universities and they're sort of trying to educate their populace in technology. They're basically saying, look, we know the resource extraction business is a bad one and we have a limited time on it. So we're going to take the money we've got now and we're going to build all kinds of things that are universities, technologies, and factories. We're going to put our people to work doing modernity. We're not going to repeat the mistake of becoming yet another in denial banana republic. Russia is equally productive with Saudi Arabia in the oil output and equally productive with the United States. Oil is the biggest industrial loser in terms of the future imaginable. You bet on oil. And 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, take a good look at what that industry is going to look like. Decimated. Well, one of the things that I find fascinating is that people will look at alternative energy and say, yeah, but you're completely weather dependent. You have bad weather. You can't get that beautiful electricity at all. You got 4 hours worth of generation and then that thing just shuts down. Huh, really? Anyone ever hear of something called a battery? Oh, we don't know what batteries are. Well, we are not remotely competitive with China in the creation of battery technology. And China just happens to have rare earths, which we've been seeing in the news right now, which are desperately needed to build airplanes, avionics, cars, computers, cell phones. Just about anything that has an electronic background to it relies heavily on rare earths. So as we sit there, we're dependent on China for so much, and we are having a tariff war with China. And I get it, we're competitive with China, but we're surrendering the markets to surrender. We're saying to China, take it away from us because we don't believe that this climate change is relevant. And China said, thank you. We may be able to work our way around you because we believe in climate change and we're creating all the adaptive technologies that allow people to live with climate change. We may even have carbon removal technologies. Let's put it another way. If you go online and take a look at batteries for solar power, take a look at the Eland Solar and Storage Center in Kern County. It's a massive, huge accumulation of batteries that look like, when we get back to visual on this stuff, you will realize that what you're looking at is a giant farm of huge battery capacity. And those batteries are becoming more and more efficient. Some of them are now in the future are not even going to have lithium in them. So you don't even have to worry about that rare earth. It's not as rare an earth, but it is in fact a commodity that is expensive. And we're learning how to create batteries with aluminum and iron and other things in the future. Batteries can store stuff. And if we have enough capacity to store stuff, we can actually turn completely and totally into an electrically driven economy where we're not consuming petroleum products, coal products, etc., to generate the electricity. We can use hydroelectric power. Even the new nuclear power is very interesting. Bill Gates is experimenting with nuclear reactors that do not rely on water to heat steam to drive turbines. Instead, they're looking at liquid sodium, salt, I'll put it that way, NaCl, sodium chloride. And salt can be kept much more stable than these, meltdown issues that we've seen in Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and other places. Salt is a much more stable and much easier technology to use, and we can do it. We're talking about some people who think that they can deal with, fission, and maybe that's there, but right now I think it's a very expensive technology if it works. Okay, but we can do things. If the government will put their shoulder into it and support companies that are investing in this area, instead of saying, no, we're not going to fund any research in this area. We're going to shut down projects, even though they're 80 or 90% complete for solar power or wind power, which on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being stupid is a 20. We are inanely stupid, and we're basically handing stuff to China. And frankly, in the world of worlds, I'm sorry, I would rather vote for the United States of America rather than the People's Republic of China. But we seem to be doing things in this country. It's almost as if someone's paying us to give China the edge over what we should be leading on. And even when we're trying to push technology forward so we can blow China's sorry ass off the planet, we're killing the very universities that do the research that allow us to grow into that capacity. China is giggling because not only are we cutting down our university research areas, but the professors that used to be high on the list of creative technologists, engineers, scientists, are now going to other countries, including China. There's such a huge migration of technology research going to Canada that basically American companies that have research facilities are now moving those research facilities to Canada and pulling them out of the United States. That's stupid. I don't want China or other countries to have an edge over us. I want Americans to have those jobs. And when you sit there and buy into this hoax philosophy, all you're doing is saying, I love China more than I love the United States. I want China to be more successful than us. Well, I want China to dominate the world. I don't. I hope you don't either. And it's not that I hate competition from other countries, but we're better than that. We are the technology leaders on planet Earth. Why can't we do what we're best at? Why are we pulling out of that? Because somebody created a conspiracy theory that has absolutely no validity whatsoever. It's not a hoax. And I always find it very interesting when people proselytize about the hoax of climate change as a tornado or a hurricane or a wildfire sweeping through their state. I don't get it. Open your eyes and see what's happening. Look. And if you think it's just the storms, it isn't. There's another issue. Heat. And you will find that people who live in heat die with greater frequency than people who live in a more temperate or controlled environment. If you happen to have a nasty drug habit, understand that the mortality rates of drug users as heat goes up is much, much, much higher. That's not good. And as we sit there and deal with medical issues, heat is a medical issue. But if you want to mediate heat, you have air conditioning. But air conditioning, it uses electrical power. So it gets to be a vicious cycle. Let's talk a little bit about vicious cycles. Anybody knows that if you paint your roof white, it will reflect heat. If you paint your roof black, it will absorb heat. Dark absorbs heat. White reflects it. So take a look at the solar areas. Look at what they're covered with. They're covered with ice. So when sunlight hits those lovely patches of ice, it reflects up. We lose a lot of dangerous heat because ice reflects the heat up. So what happens if that ice melts? What's under that ice? Land, oceans, all of which are darker than the ice. So as the ice melts, the dark underbelly is exposed, and that absorbs the sunlight and absorbs the heat, which melts more ice. Can you see a vicious cycle happening here? There's something that happened in the Antarctic that is most interesting. In the Antarctic, recently, the water temperature increased to such a level that ice melted and a fissure opened to release methane. Methane is 23 to 24 times heavier than carbon dioxide, even though it degrades faster. It is profoundly worse for climate change. So let's take a look at that. How about the ice that covers tundra or permafrost, whatever you want to call it? That ice reflects up and gets all that stuff out. But when that ice disappears, the permafrost underneath absorbs the heat and starts to melt. What happens in permafrost when it melts? Oh, it releases massive amounts of methane. And methane, remember, is 24 times heavier than carbon dioxide. It accelerates climate change. And it's that tipping point, that reality, when you no longer have to do anything, where it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We melt ice, darkness, more ice melts, more darkness. And that's the problem with a tipping point. The tipping point is everywhere. It's not in one place, and it's not happening exactly in sync or at the same time. But that tipping point changes. It becomes a self-fulfilling process. And at that point, it's no longer enough to just stop emitting pollutants. We saw how in 2024 we have more of it. But it's also the process where you now have to figure out how to take carbon out of the atmosphere, or out of the air in the first place. And it's also interesting to note that sometimes we have a strange phenomenon. As we fight pollution, i.e. the stuff if you breathe it in, it's bad for you, aerosols, etc., particulate emissions, sometimes we actually make climate change worse. Because if we leave dark particulates, aerosols in, they absorb heat. And if we eliminate light-colored sulfates and other things that are part of particulate emissions, those sulfates were reflecting heat up. So it gets to be a very interesting analysis when you actually have to look at how do we run our pollution controls in a way that makes sense. And the scientific complexity is getting defeated by people who don't want research to take place. We need to do all of these things. Now, there's an interesting article I picked up today in the LA Times, and it says, wildfire bill comes due for homeowners. Multiple insurers receive okay to charge policyholders across California to help cover the costs arising out of January firestorms. So that means if you live in a state which has, and Florida is like limestone underneath a lot of Florida, and sinkholes are a hobby in Florida. If you live in a state where any number of the residents are suffering climate change disasters, the insurance rates for that entire state are going to go up, and everybody's going to pay more. That may not be something you want to have happen. So let me go and make a few observations here. I have a list of what I call the billion-dollar disasters from 1980 to 2024, and it's a nasty list. If I just started reading this off, you would have me hours and hours and hours of dealing with this and reading it off. So you can go on Wikipedia if you want and just pull up list of natural disasters in the United States. So you can just start with wherever you want to go, but let's take a look. These are billion dollar plus problems. We have 43 in 2025. We have 43 major tornadoes. We have 136 major floods. We have 27 major wildfires. That's up to now. And you aggregate all these things, and it's billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I'm not even out of 2025. Then you go into 2024, and you've got all kinds of fun hurricanes. Hurricane Helene, Beryl, you have the Hawaiian wildfires. I mean, you can go down the list and see that. Every one of those is expensive. And let's face it, Donald Trump doesn't want to pay anymore. He's dissolving FEMA. He's pulling them out of it. Or if you happen to be a Democratic state, you ain't going to get any coverage anyway. But I like to think that Americans are in this together. Maybe we're not. But ultimately, if you don't take care of all the people in the United States, what do you think you've got left? What if we don't care for each other? I don't care if you're in a red state or in a blue state. If you suffered a natural disaster, I'm an American, and I want to support my fellow Americans with disaster relief. I want to help them with the Army Corps of Engineers. I want them to build preventative measures for the future. And if they need homes, they need food, medical care, whatever, I'm never going to say, no, you're a red state. That's just not morally in my wheelhouse. So it's all of this. Each and every person listening to this podcast, you have individual decisions that you can make about climate change. If you reject it, you will pay more. And it's funny, it's a personal decision, but the aggregation of personal decisions cannot be stopped. We can do it. The technology for everything we need to do exists, and we can maintain a high quality of life. We can maintain weather and climate that we can live with. But every single day that we don't act, the cost for the future will be 10 times more than any penny we ever save. So that's all I have to say today. I'm glad I'm able to share this cheery moment with you. But the answer is we can fix this. Let's do it. Questions from my lovely producer, Amanda.
Okay, you said at the beginning that the title of the episode is Climate Change Tipping Points. And at the very end, you said, we can fix this, we can do it, and let's do it together. So where in your mind is the tipping point? Has it not happened?
It's happened already in many different places. It's different tipping points for different areas. The tipping point of 1.5 degrees Celsius has been a global number the United Nations uses to promulgate policies on an international level. But the tipping point occurred with the lovely coral reefs. It's already happened in Florida. Screwed. Florida is going to be a great basin of water within the next 100 years. But, for all of this stuff, there is something we can do. We have the technology to pull greenhouse gases out of the air. We have the ability to plant plants that can create greater photosynthesis and oxygenation of the planet. We can do that. It's not like we have to say, well, we hit the tipping point and there's no way back. The way back is different. Today, the way back is all about sucking that carbon dioxide and methane out of the air, in addition to stopping adding more of it. If we do both of those things, we can do it. We have to start now. Every day that we postpone is going to be worse and worse and worse. And that's what I'm tired of the postponement. I'm tired of people canceling projects. I'm tired of Donald Trump's total falsehood that climate change is a hoax. It's not.
And then one more question. Well, it's not a question, but you have you always refer to Mother Nature in a quote that she doesn't care. Can you tell us your quote about Mother Nature?
It's basically Mother Nature doesn't give a rat's ass what we do. You want to eliminate the earth? I started with nothing. We didn't even have protozoans back there. I got rid of the dinosaurs. It didn't seem like a good thing. I dropped an asteroid on them. I don't care. You can't vote me out. Your opinion doesn't make jack shit bit of difference to me. I don't care. I have something that no nuclear device, no nation on earth can counter. And you're stuck with it. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. What is that, Peter? Called the laws of physics.
What is the impact of climate change on disease and food supply?
Well, the interesting thing about disease is a lot of disease is borne by insects. And when temperature changes occur, insects migrate, and each year it may not be much of a migration, but they tend to migrate to where the climate reflects the environment they lived in. But where they fly or zoom into often is not a place that is prepared to deal with the insect. So if you have a mosquito-borne disease, a fly-borne disease, you have animals carrying disease, and they move into an area that has never had those diseases before, you will watch a proliferation of those diseases. You're already seeing new mosquito-borne diseases that are coming through the United States. And all I can tell you is those diseases are being taken into places in the United States that have absolutely no natural defenses. There are no natural predators for a lot of these insects that are carrying diseases. And in terms of food supply, one of the most powerful images that you can see is to take a look at countries where food cannot be grown anymore because desertification has taken over the land and made it completely unproductive. And there's a side story to that, and that is farmers who live on that land, often in places like in the Middle East or in Africa, can't live there anymore. So what do? Oh, they migrate. And so if you think you have an immigration problem in this country, countries all over the world are facing an immigration problem from desperate farmers no longer able to grow food and from food prices soaring through the stratosphere because climate change has taken land out of service. Those are the realities we have to live with, and we did it to ourselves.
You refer a lot to the tipping point. Will you expand upon what the tipping point actually is?
A tipping point is a point of no return. It's self-fulfilling unless you do something that you didn't do before. In other words, a tipping point says it is at that point, it's not enough to take the pollutants out of the air, stop emitting pollutants into the air, greenhouse gases into the air. But after the tipping point, you can still remove the toxic greenhouse gases from the air and bring us back. It's much harder, much more expensive to do it after we hit the tipping point. And the more you wait on the tipping point, it can be ginormous. But there is a way past the tipping point. It just means before the tipping point, you eliminate the emissions. After the tipping point, you continue to eliminate emissions, and then you have to take the stuff out of the air that's there. That's it.
So I always thought that the tipping point was the actual point of no return, where despite all efforts, there's a point of no return. And that's wrong.
It's wrong on a macro sense, but if you eliminate all the coral reefs in the world from tipping points, they're not coming back. So there are some permanent consequences to hitting a tipping point without having addressed the underlying issues. But if you hit a tipping point where the solution is to remove those greenhouse gases, that is an answer. You can at least do better. And so the answer here is let's try and stop dumping stuff into the air. But where we have, and it's really, really bad, let's start figuring out how to capture those carbon-based emissions and bring them out of the atmosphere. A couple of additional wonderful things. China currently generates more electrical power from alternative energy than coal. Maybe we missed that. And the other thing that's fascinating, if you're trying to coordinate battery power with solar or wind or other forms of alternative energy, if you add AI to all of those things, the efficiency factor flies through the roof. So anyone who thinks technology can't help us deal with climate change, you don't get it. Of course it does. We just have to have the willingness to do it. We have the technology to do it, and we have the smart people to help us get there.
When you say that AI can help, I hear it on a macro level, but specifically, what does AI do to add efficiency?
Well, you can think about it I hate to use a Tesla as an example, but what Tesla does with battery power is when batteries tend to overheat, it takes them offline and puts other batteries online. It also analyzes what the future is going to look like. In other words, if you have certain weather patterns or heat patterns, The AI can predict what batteries need to be put online and whether you need to address another bank of batteries or whether you need to generate more solar energy or more wind energy. It can adapt what needs to be done so that what you're doing is generating the most efficient combination you can.
And what does that mean when you say, like a Tesla, for example, takes a battery off so that other batteries can be put on? What does that mean?
It means basically as batteries overheat, they become inefficient and they can even be destroyed. What Tesla does, and this technology is ubiquitous now, what Tesla does is says it takes the battery that's in the danger zone off to let it cool down and shifts it to other battery cells in the same car to take over until the other battery comes back, and then it gets brought back online. Peter Dekom signing off until next time. Bye-bye.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at dekompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.